He didn't walk away because of money, he walked away because of something he was never supposed to see. For years, the public assumed the silence meant nothing. A quiet distance, a private decision, just another wealthy celebrity stepping back from a complicated friendship. But in certain circles, silence is never empty. It is deliberate. And when Tyler Perry stopped speaking, stopped hosting, stopped explaining, it raised a question far more unsettling than any headline ever asked. What makes a man known for loyalty, discretion, and second chances quietly close the door without a single public word? Tonight, we are not here to recycle gossip or internet outrage. We are here to examine patterns, timelines, networks, decisions that happen far away from cameras, long before the public narrative ever forms. Because when someone like Tyler Perry reassesses trust, it is rarely impulsive. It is usually informed, carefully, privately, and often uncomfortably. This story is not about one argument, one meeting, or one misunderstanding. It is about how elite worlds actually function, how introductions are made, how reputations are built, and how past associations don't disappear simply because a new chapter begins. It is about how powerful institutions protect themselves, how silence can serve multiple purposes, and how well-meaning allies can suddenly realize they've been standing inside a story they never fully understood. As we move forward, you'll hear familiar names but approached from unfamiliar angles. You'll see how overlapping timelines raise questions without making accusations. You'll understand why certain relationships are never explained publicly, and why some truths, once examined calmly, become impossible to ignore. So, before you click away, stay with us. Because by the end of this video, you may see this entire saga, and the quiet exit that started it in a very different light. To understand how this story unfolds, we need to step away from headlines and into a world most people never see, not because it is secret, but because it is selective. Power at this level does not operate through public announcements. It operates through access. Elite social circles are not built around chance encounters. They are built around curated environments, private clubs, invitation-only retreats, charity galas, and discreet international gatherings where wealth, influence, and reputation quietly intersect. One of the most frequently mentioned spaces in these conversations is Soho House, not as a villain, not as a conspiracy, but as an example of how modern elite networking actually functions. These are places designed to feel informal while operating with precision. Introductions are rarely random. Seating arrangements matter. Guest lists are filtered. And relationships form not through public visibility, but through repeated proximity, the same faces appearing across cities, seasons, and continents. For those inside this ecosystem, familiarity builds trust faster than resumes ever could. For viewers over 50, this concept may feel familiar. It mirrors older power structures, golf clubs, university societies, diplomatic dinners, boardroom luncheons. The difference today is scale and globalization. A conversation that begins in London can quietly continue in New York, Istanbul, or Los Angeles without a single email trail. What's important here is not to assume wrongdoing, but to understand mechanics. In these environments, people are often known by reputation long before they are known personally. Someone can arrive already vouched for, already framed as trustworthy, talented, or worthy of protection, not because of a lie, but because of a network effect. And once that framing is in place, it tends to travel with them. This is where misunderstandings often begin. To an outsider, a new relationship might appear spontaneous, a chance meeting, a blind date, a lucky break. Inside elite circles, those moments are often the final step, not the first. The groundwork happens earlier. Shared social spaces, overlapping guest lists, mutual acquaintances who quietly say, "You should meet." For someone like Tyler Perry, who has navigated Hollywood for decades, this system is not foreign. He understands how trust is transferred, how reputations are borrowed, and how introductions can carry unseen weight. That is precisely why, when trust is reassessed at this level, it is rarely emotional, it is structural. And this brings us to the central tension of our story. If relationships in elite society are shaped by invisible architecture, by connectors, by curated access, by repeated proximity, then the question is not who met whom, but how and through what channels. Because once you start mapping those channels, patterns emerge. Not accusations, patterns. In the next part, we'll begin examining those patterns calmly, carefully by looking at overlapping timelines and shared social circuits that raise questions without drawing conclusions. Stay with us. This is where the story quietly deepens. When stories become polarizing, the most productive place to begin is not with accusations, but with calendars, dates, locations, public records. Because timelines don't argue, they simply exist. Between the early to mid-2010 seconds, Meghan Markle was moving through a transitional period familiar to many working actors. Her professional life required flexibility, filming schedules, promotional appearances, international travel, and social obligations tied to visibility. None of this is unusual in the entertainment industry. What becomes noteworthy, however, is how often those movements intersected with broader, well-documented social circuits connected to global wealth and influence. At the same time, Prince Andrew remained active within a long-established network of international engagements, philanthropic events, private gatherings, and social functions that, by design, operated outside daily press coverage. These were not secret trips. They were simply low-visibility ones, common among senior figures accustomed to privacy. What independent observers have pointed out over the years is not a single coincidence, but a pattern of proximity. The same regions, similar seasonal windows, repeated appearances within overlapping social environments, Mediterranean summers, global resort destinations, high-end private events that attract a familiar, rotating guest list year after year. This does not prove intent. It does not prove relationship. But it does invite a question that responsible analysis must allow. When two individuals consistently appear within the same limited social ecosystem over multiple years, is it coincidence or simply how elite networks function? It's important to stress what is not being claimed here. There is no verified public record detailing private conversations, no documentation of agreements, no direct evidence of personal arrangements, and responsible storytelling must leave that boundary intact. What can be discussed are the mechanics of elite visibility. In tightly curated environments, especially those involving private travel or invitation-only gatherings, appearances often precede public narratives. People become familiar faces long before the public ever recognizes their names. By the time a relationship or introduction is announced, the groundwork, social, reputational, and logistical, has often been laid quietly. For audiences who have lived long enough to see institutions up close, this may sound familiar. Whether in business, politics, or diplomacy, introductions are rarely spontaneous. They are the result of vetting, proximity, and comfort built over time. And this is where the narrative tension deepens. Because when later stories are presented as sudden or unexpected, a chance meeting, a blind date, an unlikely crossing of paths, they sometimes conflict with the slower, less visible reality of elite social life. That conflict does not automatically imply deception. It can also reflect a desire for simplicity in public storytelling. Public narratives are designed to be digestible. Private histories are rarely so clean. For someone observing from the outside, particularly someone experienced in navigating reputation and influence, the presence of overlapping timelines can prompt a reassessment, not of character, but of context, not of morality, but of structure. And this is where discomfort often enters the room, because once you accept that elite worlds run on repeated proximity rather than randomness, certain questions become unavoidable. Who facilitates these overlaps? Who introduces whom? And how much of what we later call destiny is actually choreography? We are not drawing conclusions here. We are building a framework, one that allows viewers to understand how reputations, access, and trust move through closed systems. In the next section, we will turn our focus to the figures who specialize in that movement, the connectors, the facilitators, the people whose professional role is to make worlds intersect without ever appearing center stage. That is where the story becomes even more revealing. Stay with us. Every complex system has visible leaders and invisible architects. In elite social environments, those architects are rarely the loudest voices in the room. They are the ones who connect. They understand who belongs where, who should meet whom, and just as importantly, who should not. In modern high-net-worth circles, these figures are often described as connectors. Their job is not to command, but to facilitate. Not to control outcomes, but to shape access. They move quietly between worlds, entertainment, finance, philanthropy, diplomacy, ensuring that introductions feel organic, even when they are carefully considered. One name that frequently appears in discussions about elite social facilitation is Marcus Anderson. Publicly, he is best known for his professional role within Soho House, an organization built around curated community and discretion. Privately, he is often described by observers as someone who understands people, their aspirations, their sensitivities, and their compatibility within exclusive spaces. It's important to be precise here. Being a connector is not inherently controversial. In fact, it is a respected skill. Throughout history, influential societies have relied on intermediaries, people who reduce friction, smooth introductions, and create environments where trust can form quickly. From diplomatic attachés to talent agents to philanthropic liaisons, this role has always existed. What makes connectors interesting from a narrative perspective is not what they do, but how little attention they draw while doing it. Connectors rarely appear as decision-makers. They don't announce partnerships. They don't claim credit. Their influence is measured not by visibility, but by repetition, the same names crossing paths, the same social circles overlapping, the same relationships deepening over time. To an outsider, it can look like coincidence. To an insider, it looks like continuity. And continuity is the key word. When relationships form within elite ecosystems, they often feel natural because the environment has already been calibrated. Shared values are assumed. Cultural norms are aligned. Expectations are quietly communicated long before any formal introduction occurs. By the time two people sit across from each other, much of the work has already been done. For seasoned observers, particularly those who have spent decades navigating entertainment, business, or philanthropic spaces, this process is recognizable. It is not sinister. It is simply structured. This is why, when narratives later emphasize spontaneity, some listeners pause, not because spontaneity is impossible, but because it is rare at the highest levels of access. Elite worlds tend to minimize unpredictability. They favor familiarity. They prefer people who arrive already understood. From this perspective, connectors function less like matchmakers and more like curators. They don't create relationships. They align trajectories. They see patterns before others do. They understand who is ready for which room, which audience, which next step. And that understanding carries influence even if it is never formally acknowledged. This brings us to an important distinction. Influence does not require intent to deceive. A connector can act entirely within professional boundaries, while still shaping outcomes in ways that only become visible in hindsight. When viewed years later, what once felt like chance can begin to look like sequence. For viewers watching this from different parts of the world, this may resonate beyond this specific story. Many have seen similar dynamics play out in their own fields, a colleague introduced at just the right moment, an opportunity appearing through a familiar intermediary, a door opening because someone quietly vouched for you. So here is the question worth considering, and we invite you to reflect on it thoughtfully. When powerful relationships emerge, how often are they truly accidental? And how often are they the result of invisible facilitation? We would also like to hear from you. As you watch this analysis, Please share briefly and respectfully the city and country you are viewing from. Understanding where our audience is helps us appreciate how differently these systems are perceived around the world. In the next part, we will shift from people to numbers, not to accuse, but to understand how lifestyle, income, and public perception sometimes move at different speeds, and why, for careful observers, those differences can raise questions that deserve calm examination. Stay with us. The picture is becoming clearer, one layer at a time. When stories reach an impasse, when intentions are unclear and motivations are debated, numbers often provide a calmer place to stand. Not because they tell us why something happened, but because they show us how things appeared at a given moment in time. This section is not about accusation. It is about optics, expectations, and the quiet tension that arises when lifestyle and visible income seem to move at different speeds. In the public imagination, success in entertainment is often misunderstood as linear and lucrative. In reality, it is uneven. Actors, creatives, and media professionals frequently experience income spikes followed by long plateaus. Contracts are finite, residuals fluctuate, taxes, representation fees, and international expenses reduce headline numbers dramatically. None of this is controversial. It is standard industry math. During the mid-2010 seconds, Meghan Markle was publicly associated with a steady television role. By conventional standards, that represented stability. But stability in entertainment does not always translate to liquidity, especially when one is maintaining a bicontinental professional presence. Travel, wardrobe, public relations, housing across cities, these costs add up quickly, often invisibly to the audience. This is where financial optics begin to matter. Observers at the time noted a lifestyle that reflected global mobility, frequent international travel, participation in elite social events, and access to environments typically associated with significant discretionary spending. Again, this does not imply impropriety. There are many legitimate explanations: savings, family support, partnerships, shared costs, or deferred compensation structures common in creative industries. However, for individuals accustomed to managing large organizations and budgets, people like Tyler Perry, such patterns naturally invite questions. Not suspicion, but curiosity. In business, when costs consistently exceed visible revenue, the responsible response is to ask how the gap is being bridged. In elite circles, there are well-known mechanisms that can account for this. Trusts, investment vehicles, shared residences, and sponsorship arrangements are all legal and widely used. Offshore financial centers, in particular, are not inherently illicit. They exist to manage taxation, currency exposure, and international assets, and they are utilized by corporations, governments, and private citizens alike. The issue, from a narrative standpoint, is not the existence of these tools, but the disconnect between public simplicity and private complexity. Public stories tend to favor clarity: a single income source, a straightforward career path, a clean arc of progress. Private financial lives, especially among globally mobile professionals, are rarely so neat. Multiple accounts, staggered payments, and long-term planning are the norm, not the exception. Where tension arises is when the public narrative emphasizes independence and transparency, while the underlying financial reality, whatever its specifics, remains opaque. For audiences over 50, many of whom have managed businesses, households, or careers across decades, this tension is familiar. It mirrors moments when someone appears more financially secure than their job title suggests, prompting quiet questions rather than open confrontation. And this is an important distinction. Questions are not conclusions. Curiosity is not condemnation. Financial opacity does not equal wrongdoing. But when trust is involved, particularly trust extended privately, clarity becomes valuable. Not to satisfy public curiosity, but to ensure personal boundaries are respected. This is why, in some relationships, financial understanding becomes a turning point, not because money is the central issue, but because it reflects alignment, shared expectations, shared realities. When those drift apart, even slightly, they can create discomfort for those who value transparency. For someone whose life's work has been built on contracts, accountability, and clear terms, that discomfort matters. It doesn't require drama. It doesn't demand public explanation. Often, it simply results in distance, and that distance, when viewed from the outside, can look mysterious. In the next section, we will step away from finances and toward institutions, families, traditions, and long-standing structures that prioritize stability over disclosure. We will explore why silence is sometimes chosen not to protect individuals, but to protect systems. Stay with us. The most revealing answers are often found not in what is said, but in what remains unsaid. When individuals withdraw quietly, the reason is often personal. When institutions do the same, the reason is structural. To understand the silence that surrounds certain chapters of this story, we have to look beyond personalities and toward systems that have existed long before any single figure entered the public eye. Large institutions, whether royal households, multinational corporations, or legacy families, are built to endure. Their first instinct is not disclosure, but continuity. They operate on precedent, hierarchy, and internal resolution. Public explanation is rarely the default option, especially when doing so risks destabilizing the broader structure. Within this framework, silence is not absence. It is a tool. Historically, royal families have relied on discretion as a form of risk management. Private disagreements are handled internally. Potential controversies are contained rather than confronted publicly. This is not unique to monarchy. It mirrors how long-standing institutions everywhere protect themselves. The guiding principle is simple. Individual discomfort is preferable to institutional damage. This is where family dynamics intersect with governance. When a family also functions as a public institution, the line between personal loyalty and structural obligation becomes blurred. Members are not only relatives, they are stewards of continuity. Decisions are filtered through questions like, will this protect the institution? Will this escalate unnecessarily? Will silence resolve more than speech? From this perspective, the absence of public correction does not automatically imply approval, nor does it confirm awareness. It often reflects a calculated decision to avoid amplifying an issue that may otherwise fade on its own. This is why figures such as Princess Anne are frequently described by commentators as institutional stabilizers. Her public reputation is not built on media engagement, but on duty and restraint. She represents a generation trained to prioritize continuity over commentary, to act decisively behind closed doors while maintaining a composed public front. This approach can be frustrating for outside observers, particularly in a media environment that prizes transparency and immediate explanation. But for institutions measured in centuries rather than news cycles, restraint is often viewed as strength. The tension becomes sharper when personal relationships intersect with public narratives. For example, Prince Harry has spoken openly about feeling isolated within a system that values tradition over emotional expression. His perspective reflects a generational shift, one that prioritizes openness, personal truth, and public dialogue. That shift, while culturally resonant, can clash with institutions built on discretion and containment. In such environments, silence can feel like betrayal to one party and protection to another. This is not a question of right or wrong, but of incompatible operating systems. One prioritizes personal validation, the other prioritizes institutional survival. When these systems collide, misunderstandings multiply, and trust erodes quietly. It is also important to recognize that institutions often act preemptively. Silence may be chosen not because a situation is harmless, but because addressing it publicly could trigger consequences far beyond the immediate issue. Legal exposure, diplomatic fallout, and reputational contagion are all considered often conservatively. For viewers who have worked within large organizations, this logic may sound familiar. Human resources departments, legal teams, and executive boards frequently advise silence not to deceive, but to minimize risk. The result can feel cold, but it is usually strategic. And this brings us back to the quiet exits that sparked so much speculation. When individuals with institutional awareness step back without explanation, it often signals that they recognize limits on what can be said, what should be challenged, and what must be left to internal resolution. Distance becomes a form of boundary setting. This does not resolve public curiosity. It rarely satisfies emotional narratives, but it aligns with how enduring systems preserve themselves. In the final part of this series, we will step away from institutions and return to the audience to reflect on what this story reveals about power, perception, and the stories we choose to believe. Not to render judgment, but to consider what lessons remain once the noise fades. Stay with us. The conclusion is not about blame, it is about understanding. When the noise finally fades, what remains is not a scandal, a headline, or a side to choose, but a lesson about how the world actually works when cameras are turned off. This story reminds us that power rarely moves in straight lines. It travels through relationships, through trust quietly transferred, through systems that reward familiarity over chance. For most of us, life is built on what we see and what we're told. But in elite environments, outcomes are often shaped long before the public ever hears a name or a narrative. The deeper lesson here is not about individuals. It is about awareness. Reinvention is possible. Growth is real. But the past does not disappear simply because a new chapter begins. Networks remember. Institutions remember. And silence, more often than not, is not emptiness. It is calculation. For anyone navigating careers, relationships, or influence later in life, this truth feels especially familiar. Trust must be earned slowly, boundaries matter, and clarity is more valuable than charisma. From my personal perspective, the most compelling aspect of this story is not who stepped away, but why stepping away was the chosen response. No press conference, no retaliation, just distance. Sometimes, that is the most powerful statement a person can make. At Edge of Legacy, our goal is not to tell you what to think, but to invite you to think deeper, to look beyond simple explanations, and consider the systems beneath the surface. Stories like this are not about outrage, they are about understanding how legacy, power, and perception intersect in the real world. If this analysis gave you a new perspective, please take a moment to like the video. It helps more thoughtful content reach the right audience. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. What lessons stood out most to you? And don't forget to subscribe to Edge of Legacy and turn on notifications. There are always more layers to uncover and more pages left to turn.